Chapter 1. The Night No One Asked Her About. It is April 4th, 1958. A bedroom on North Bedford Drive in Beverly Hills. A 14-year-old girl is standing in the hallway outside her mother's room. She can hear her mother crying. She can hear a man's voice, loud and climbing louder. She has heard this before, many times before. She knows what is coming next. She does not go to her own room and close the door. She walks to the kitchen. She opens a drawer. She takes out a large carving knife. She walks back down the hallway. She knocks on the door. Her mother opens it. The girl steps through. What happened in the next 60 seconds would be on the radio before dawn. It would be in the newspapers of every city in the country before breakfast. It would be discussed in beauty salons, barbershops, and living rooms for months. But nobody stopped to ask the 14-year-old what she felt when she walked back down that hallway. Nobody wrote the story of what she carried with her for the next 60 years. This is that story. What you're about to watch has been buried for centuries. Lost, forgotten, hidden in plain sight. Most people walk past these walls every day and feel nothing. But you clicked. Which means somewhere deep inside you, you already knew there was more to the story. And there is. Every crack, every stone, every shadow on these ancient walls whispers a secret the history books never told you. Welcome to Ancient Walls, where the past doesn't just speak, it screams. Now, sit back. Turn up your volume, because what comes next will change the way you see the world forever. Lana Turner had the face that launched 1,000 magazine covers and an MGM contract before she was 17 years old. She had 7 husbands, more than 50 films, an Academy Award nomination, and a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. She was photographed in white mink. She was photographed in diamonds. She was one of the most recognized women in the United States for the better part of 3 decades. But in her later years, in the interviews where the careful studio polish was off, she always came back to the same thing. She always said her daughter was what she was most proud of. One daughter, one long, complicated, extraordinary story. And it is one almost nobody knows in full. A girl raised at the edge of the spotlight, never quite inside it, and never quite free of it. A girl who killed a man at 14 years old and was cleared of all charges and then had to figure out how to live. A girl who built a life that looks nothing like the one she came from, and everything like something she chose for herself. That is the story we are telling today. Chapter 2. Born into a life she never chose. Lana Turner, by 1958, was not just a movie star. She was an institution. She had been under contract with MGM since 1937, when she was 16 years old, and the studio system was at the peak of its power and confidence. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer in those years controlled everything it touched. It controlled the films its stars appeared in. It controlled the stories the press told about them. It managed their images, their scandals, their marriages when it could, and their disasters when it had to. Turner was one of its prizes. Her photographs sold magazines. Her appearances at premieres drew crowds. Her name on a marquee meant something real at the box office. She had made The Postman Always Rings Twice in 1946, playing Cora Smith opposite John Garfield, and the film had been a sensation. She had made The Bad and the Beautiful in 1952. She had made Peyton Place in 1957, which was the biggest commercial success of her career and the film that earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. She was not just a beautiful face. She was a serious commercial force. But the studio system ran on control, and control, when you are the person being controlled, leaves marks. Turner had been married 5 times by 1957. 5. She was 36 years old. The marriages had come and gone, with a speed that suggested something specific about the way she moved through the world. She fell hard, and she committed completely, and she trusted people she perhaps should not have trusted. And each marriage, each collapse, each new beginning had reshuffled the life around her daughter. Chapter 3. The Man Who Should Have Never Been There. Johnny Stompanato entered that life sometime in 1957. He was handsome. He was 32 years old. He was connected, through various business arrangements, to Mickey Cohen, the Los Angeles mob figure who was one of the most recognized criminal names in the city. Stompanato was not a secret about himself. He moved in the world he moved in without particular apology. Turner knew what he was, and she stayed. She has talked in interviews about the pull of it, the danger of it, the way that certain kinds of intensity feel, in the moment, like love. She was not naive. She was a woman who had been married 5 times and understood men. But she stayed with Stompanato, and she stayed even as the relationship grew more frightening. He had followed her to England in 1957 when she was filming Another Time, Another Place. He had shown up on the set uninvited. He had gone to the set where Sean Connery, then 27 years old, was playing Turner's love interest. He had made threats. Connery, who was a large and not especially frightened man, had grabbed Stompanato by the arm and removed him from the set. Stompanato had been humiliated. When Turner and Stompanato returned to California, she tried to end things. He did not permit the ending of things. He threatened her. He said things to her that were specific and physical and designed to make her understand that he was not going to let her go. Turner told some of this to Cheryl, not all of it. Children are always given less than the truth in situations like this, and parents tell themselves that is protection. But Cheryl heard the arguments. She heard the voice getting loud. She knew the shape of what was happening, even when she did not know all the details. Good Friday, April 4th, 1958. The argument that night was about Turner's decision to end the relationship permanently. Stompanato told her he would hurt her. He told her he would cut her face so no one would want to look at her. He told her he would kill her. He told her he would kill her mother. He told her he would kill Cheryl. Cheryl heard this from the hallway. She was 14 years old. She went to the kitchen. Chapter 4. The Lonely Girl Behind the Glamour. Cheryl Christina Crane was born on July 25th, 1943, in Los Angeles, California. She was the only child of Lana Turner and Stephen Crane, the second of Turner's 7 husbands. Crane was not a film star. He was a restaurateur, an ordinary and by most accounts decent man who had married an extraordinary woman and found the combination unsustainable. He and Turner divorced before Cheryl had formed any coherent memory of them together. What this meant practically, from the earliest days of Cheryl's life, was that she grew up in the orbit of her mother's life, rather than inside a stable center of her own. Turner's schedule was relentless. The studio needed her available. The films needed her present. The press needed access. And the men in her life needed things that took time and energy and focus. Cheryl got what was left. She went to private schools. She wore good clothes. She was photographed sometimes, standing at her mother's side at premieres, at public events, at the kind of carefully staged appearances that the studio machinery produced. From the outside, these photographs looked like a charmed life. A little girl in white gloves next to one of the most glamorous women in the world. Cheryl Crane has talked about those photographs in interviews. She has said that she loved her mother completely and always. She has also said that the distance between the photographs and the reality of daily life was something she understood early and understood deeply. By her own account, she was a lonely child, not materially deprived, not unloved, but lonely in the particular way of children who are always on the outside of the thing their parent is most consumed by. Turner was consumed by her career, by her marriages, by the men who came after the marriages, and by the intense pressure of being Lana Turner in the years when Lana Turner was at the absolute height of what that meant. Cheryl grew up in that pressure without being able to name it. She was close to her grandmother, Mildred Turner. Mildred was steady in the way that her daughter was not. She was practical and grounded, and she was present for Cheryl in the specific ways that a grandmother can be present when a mother's life is moving too fast to allow for stillness. Cheryl was in her early teens when Stompanato came into the picture. She was old enough to understand what she was seeing. She was old enough to recognize danger. She had been watching her mother's relationship since she was old enough to watch anything, and she had developed, out of that watching, a specific sensitivity to the difference between what looked fine and what was not fine. Stompanato was not fine. Cheryl understood this. She has written in her memoir about the months leading up to April 4th, the escalating tension, the arguments she heard, the bruises she noticed, the way the atmosphere in the house changed when Stompanato was there. She was a teenager. She was doing what teenagers do in impossible situations. She was watching and worrying and waiting and hoping that somehow things would resolve without anyone getting hurt. They did not resolve that way. Chapter 5. Cleared by the court, convicted by the world. The phone call to the police was made from the house shortly after Stompanato fell. Before the police arrived, another call had been made. To Jerry Giesler, one of the most prominent and expensive criminal defense attorneys in Los Angeles. Giesler had represented Errol Flynn. He had represented Bugsy Siegel. He had built his career on the specific category of scandalous clients that Hollywood produced in reliable quantities. By the time the police came through the door, Giesler was already inside. This detail matters because it tells you something about the first instinct of the adults in that room. The first instinct was not to protect the child. The first instinct was to manage the situation. Cheryl was questioned. She gave her account. She said she had gone to protect her mother. She said she believed Stompanato was going to kill Turner that night. She said she did not intend to kill him. She said she just wanted him to stop. The coroner's inquest was held publicly. This was standard in California at the time for cases where a killing had occurred, even one involving a juvenile. Everything was open. Turner testified in full. She described the relationship. She described the violence and the threats. She described the specific things Stompanato had said to her. She described what she had heard and seen on the night of April 4th. She was composed on the stand, in the way that someone who has spent decades being looked at learns to be composed under pressure. Hedda Hopper was there. Luella Parsons was there. Every entertainment reporter in Los Angeles was there. The wire services were sending the testimony out in real time. The whole country was listening. The jury took 25 minutes. Justifiable homicide. Cheryl was cleared. But the inquest was not the end of it. The press did not stop simply because the verdict was delivered. There were columnists and commentators who suggested the story was not what it appeared to be. There were suggestions that it had been Turner who stabbed Stompanato, and that Cheryl was being used as a shield. These suggestions were made loudly and in major publications. There was no evidence for them. They were made anyway. Cheryl was 14 years old, and grown adults were writing that she might be a murderer or a liar in publications her classmates could read. The juvenile court placed her in El Retiro School for Girls, a facility for troubled youth in California. She was there for several months. She has described it in her memoir. It was not a terrible place. It was not a kind place either. It was a place designed for a category of young person that did not quite fit Cheryl Crane, and she knew it, and the people there knew it, and knowing it did not make it easier to be there. Turner's response to all of this was complicated. The love was not in question. Turner loved her daughter. That much is confirmed by everything that came after. including the dedicated work of rebuilding their relationship in Turner's final years. But in the immediate aftermath of April 4th, Turner was also dealing with her own grief, her own shock, her own legal exposure, and the management of the public narrative around all of it. She was dealing with these things in a world where she had handlers and lawyers and publicists helping her deal with them, while Cheryl was in a juvenile facility figuring it out alone. Cheryl has been honest about this in her memoir and in interviews. She has not been cruel about it, but she has been honest. She said she needed her mother in those months, and her mother was not fully there. Chapter 6. She left and never looked back. What happened next took time to see clearly. The arc of Cheryl Crane's adult life does not bend in a way that makes a dramatic television movie. It bends slowly, quietly, away from Los Angeles and away from everything that Los Angeles had meant. After El Retiro, she moved between her father, Stephen Crane's household, and her grandmother's household. She spent some time in different living situations in the years that followed. She struggled with the ordinary problems of adolescence, made worse by the specific problems that were hers alone. She has talked about drinking too much, too young, about making choices in her early 20s that were not good for her, about the difficulty of trusting people when your earliest and most formative experience of the world is that the people around you are unpredictable. She was in her early 20s when she began to build something real. She went to Hawaii. She has described this period in her life as the first time she felt like herself. Hawaii in the 1960s was not Los Angeles. It did not have the same relationship to Hollywood, to the studio system, to the social world that had surrounded her since birth. She could be a person in Hawaii without being Lana Turner's daughter first. She could work. She could figure out what she was good at. She could make friends who knew her as her and not as a story. She worked in real estate. She was good at it. Real estate requires something specific, the ability to read people, to understand what they need, to stay steady under negotiation, to think clearly about the long term. These are skills that Cheryl Crane had developed in the specific school of her childhood, and she put them to work in a context where they produced something tangible and hers. She also, in Hawaii, began to understand herself more completely. Cheryl Crane is gay. She has been open about this since the 1980s, when her memoir came out. She has written about the long process of coming to understand this about herself, about the years of not having the right words for it, about what it meant to be a young woman in the 1960s, trying to figure out who she was and who she loved, without a map for that specific territory. She met Joyce Leroy. They built a life together. They were together for a long time, long enough to build the kind of life that has a shape and a rhythm and the ordinary texture of permanence. They eventually moved from Hawaii to Palm Springs, California, where they built a real estate business together. It was successful. It was theirs. Palm Springs in those years was a particular place. It was close enough to Los Angeles to be inside the orbit of Hollywood without being inside Hollywood itself. It had its own culture, its own community, its own social world. It was, for a lot of people, who needed to be near the industry without being consumed by it, exactly the right distance. Cheryl Crane built her life there. She was not hiding. She was not in exile. She was simply living, which is a harder thing than it sounds when your name has been in the newspapers since you were a child. In 1988, she published Detour, a Hollywood Story, her memoir. It was not the book people expected her to write. People expected something sensational, something with score settling and secrets and revenge. That is what gets published about Hollywood, usually. That is what sells. Detour was not that book. It was careful. It was honest. It was a book written by someone who had spent 30 years thinking about what had happened to her and what it meant and who she was inside it. She wrote about her mother with love and with clear eyes at the same time, which is a difficult thing to do and which most people never manage. She described Turner's gifts as a mother and Turner's limitations as a mother, and she described them side by side without pretending they cancelled each other out. She wrote about Stompanato. She wrote about that night. She wrote about El Retiro. She wrote about Hawaii, and about Joyce, and about the process of building a life outside the one she had been born into. She wrote about being gay in a time when that was not easy, in a family where it was not simple, in a public eye that was not kind. The book was received well. It was reviewed seriously. People read it not just for the scandal, though the scandal was there, but for the voice in it, which was quiet and direct and unsparing and genuinely earned. She gave interviews around the publication. She appeared on television. She was composed and thoughtful, and gave no indication of wanting to be any more public than the book required. She had said what she needed to say. She was not in the market for an ongoing performance. Turner's death came on June 29th, 1995. She was 74 years old. She had been diagnosed with throat cancer. She had chosen not to make a public illness of it, which was consistent with the way she had always managed the distance between her private self and her public one. She died at her home in Century City. Cheryl was 51 years old. By the time Turner died, the relationship between them had been repaired in the ways that adult relationships between complicated people can be repaired. Not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely. They had spent time together. They had had honest conversations. They had found, in Turner's later years, something that looked like real peace between them. Turner has said in her own interviews in the 1980s and early 1990s that her relationship with Cheryl was the thing she was most proud of repairing. She said this quietly and without theatre. She said it in the way of someone who knows the difference between the things she could control and the things she could not. Cheryl has spoken about her mother's death with the particular calibration of grief that comes when you lose someone you love and with whom your relationship has never been simple. It is not clean grief. It is not the grief of a straightforward loss. It is the grief of losing the person who was at the center of the most extreme things that ever happened to you, who loved you imperfectly, who you loved back in full, who is now gone, and who takes certain questions with her. She has been in Palm Springs for many years now. She is in her 80s. She has been part of the community there. She has been known to people in the area as herself, not as a story, which is a thing she has worked for since she was old enough to understand what work meant. There is a detail from the night of April 4th, 1958, that does not appear in most retellings. After the police were called, after Stompanato was on the floor, and it was clear what had happened, one of the first people to arrive at the house was Mildred Turner, Lana's mother and Cheryl's grandmother. She had been called. She came immediately. Mildred Turner had grown up in difficult circumstances. She had raised her daughter mostly alone after her husband, Lana's father, was murdered. She had worked through the Depression, and she had moved across the country, and she had watched her daughter become one of the most famous women in America. And she had understood, with the clear eyes of someone who knew where they had come from, exactly what that fame cost. On the night of April 4th, Mildred was in that house. She was there when the police came. She was there when the lawyers came. She was there when the questions were being asked, and the statements were being given, and the machinery of the law and the press was beginning to move. And at some point in that night, Mildred Turner was alone, in a room, with her 14-year-old granddaughter. What was said between them, no one has reported. It is not in the court records. It is not in the press accounts. It may be in Cheryl's memoir in some form, obliquely, in the way that the things we cannot fully describe appear in memoirs. But Mildred Turner stayed. She was in that house that night, and she was there in the months that followed. One of the most consistent presences in Cheryl's life during the period when consistency was the rarest thing. Cheryl dedicated her memoir to her grandmother. The dedication reads simply, "It does not explain. It does not need to." Chapter 7. The woman, the cameras, never really knew. Lana Turner was born Julia Jean Turner on February 8th, 1921, in Wallace, Idaho. This is not the beginning of the story people know. The story people know starts with the soda fountain on Sunset Boulevard, the tight sweater, Billy Wilkerson from The Hollywood Reporter, the moment of discovery that became one of the foundational myths of old Hollywood. But the story actually starts in Wallace, Idaho, where her father, John Virgil Turner, was a miner. He was a working man in a working town. He played cards and he worked, and by most accounts he loved his wife and his daughter in the ordinary ways of fathers who are not mythologized. Lana was 9 years old when he was murdered. He had won money in a card game and was walking home. Someone followed him and hit him over the head and took the money. He did not survive his injuries. She was 9 years old. Her mother Mildred gathered what she had and moved. They went to San Francisco first, then to Los Angeles. They were not wealthy. They were two women alone, making what they could. Mildred found work. Lana went to school. And sometime around 1936, when she was 15 or 16, she was noticed. The details of the discovery story have been polished by repetition into a kind of perfect shape that may or may not reflect exactly what happened. What is certain is that within a year of being noticed, she had a small part in a film. Within a few years, she was under contract at MGM. Within a decade, she was one of the most commercially valuable stars the studio had. She was in a war film in 1941, in a drama in 1942, in a noir in 1946, in a glossy melodrama in 1952. She worked constantly. The studio made sure of that. Work was what it offered its stars in exchange for the control it exercised over them. Work and money and visibility and the protection of the MGM name. The marriages ran alongside the work. Artie Shaw in 1940, when she was 19 years old. Shaw was a band leader and a complicated man who left a trail of bruised women in his wake. The marriage lasted 4 months. She was divorced before she was 20. Stephen Crane in 1942, Cheryl's father. An annulment and a remarriage and a final divorce. Cheryl was born in 1943. Bob Topping in 1948. A wealthy man, a different kind of life. This marriage lasted longer, 3 years, before it too dissolved. Lex Barker in 1953. Barker played Tarzan on screen. Off-screen, he was something else. Cheryl has written about Barker in her memoir with specific and sober language. She has said that he abused her. She has said this directly. She was a young teenager when Barker was in the house. She told her mother. The marriage ended in 1957. Turner has been questioned in various accounts about this, about what she knew and when she knew it, about the gap between what a mother is supposed to do and what Turner did. These are not questions with comfortable answers. They are questions that belong to the specific and terrible terrain of abuse within families, where knowledge and action are not always aligned, and where a child's truth does not always receive from the adults around her the immediate and complete response it deserves. Cheryl did not receive the complete response. She has spoken about this part of her childhood with restraint and with clarity. She has not used it to destroy her mother's legacy. She has used it to tell the truth about what it was. These are different things, and the difference matters. Fred May in 1960. Robert Eaton in 1965. Ronald Dante in 1969. Turner was 48 years old when she married Ronald Dante, her 7th and final husband. The marriage lasted 2 years. After that, she did not marry again. She made films through the 60s. She did television in the 70s. She was no longer at MGM by then. The studio system had fractured across Hollywood during the 1950s and 1960s, broken apart by television and by the antitrust decisions that forced the studios to divest their theatre chains. The contract system, which had made and controlled careers for 30 years, was finished. Stars were now on their own. Turner navigated this the way an experienced woman navigates a changed landscape. She worked with what was available. She made films that were not always worthy of her. She did a television series in the 1980s, Falcon Crest. which brought her to a new audience in a new medium in a new decade. She was in her 60s. She was still Lana Turner. She wrote her autobiography in 1982, Lana, the Lady, the Legend, the Truth. It was published with the usual machinery of a celebrity memoir, the tour, the television appearances, the interviews. She was composed and precise in all of them. She told what she chose to tell and kept what she chose to keep. It is the right of anyone who has been as scrutinized as Turner was to control her own telling. She exercised that right. In the book and in the interviews around it, she talked about Cheryl. She talked about the night of April 4th. She talked about the failure she felt as a mother, the ways she had not been present enough, the weight of knowing that her daughter had been through things that a daughter should not have been through. She did not perform this. She said it flatly, the way you say things you have thought about for a long time. By the time the book was published, Cheryl's memoir was still 6 years away. Mother and daughter were in contact. They were repairing things. It was slow, and it was real. Chapter 8. Two women, one impossible love, one quiet ending. What all of these people share, what Cheryl Crane and Lana Turner and Mildred Turner, and even Stephen Crane and all the others who moved through this story share, is a proximity to a specific kind of brightness. The kind that Hollywood produced in those decades. The kind that made one woman's face appear on millions of magazine covers and millions of movie screens, and that made everything around that woman carry the weight of being so close to so much attention. The weight is not visible in the photographs. It does not appear in the fan magazines. It appears in the memoirs. It appears in the interviews done decades later, when the publicists are gone and the studio machinery is history and the person in the chair is simply talking. For Cheryl Crane, the answer was Palm Springs, a real estate business, a long partnership with Joyce Leroy, a memoir written at 45, and then a life lived mostly away from cameras, a dedication to her grandmother at the front of a book. For Lana Turner, the answer was work, always work, and, in the end, the quiet repair of the most important relationship of her life. What they share is something harder to name than a scandal. What they share is the specific experience of loving each other through a set of circumstances that would have broken many connections entirely. They did not always do this well. They did not always do this gently, but they did it. And they were in contact, in real contact, when Turner died. And Cheryl was 51 years old and had a life of her own, and she was all right. There is something worth understanding about the specific terrain of Cheryl Crane's adulthood that gets lost when people talk about her only in relation to the night of April 4th. It is this: she had to build her identity in the absence of a template. She could not simply become a version of her mother, because her mother's life, for all its beauty and success and international recognition, had also produced the hallway and the knife, and the boy who looked down at his own abdomen in disbelief. She did not want that life. She did not want any of the versions of that life that were available to a woman with her name and her history in Los Angeles in the 1960s. So she left, and she found a different map entirely. Hawaii in the 1960s was not a place people went when they wanted to be seen. It was a place people went when they wanted to be somewhere else. Cheryl Crane went to be somewhere else. She stayed long enough to figure out what she was capable of, and what she was capable of turned out to be considerable. Real estate requires a specific combination of skills. You have to understand people. You have to read what they want and what they can afford, and what they are afraid to say out loud. You have to be patient in situations where the temptation is to rush. You have to negotiate without losing either side of the negotiation. These are not skills that come from nowhere. Cheryl Crane had spent her entire childhood learning to read rooms, learning to understand what the adults around her were feeling, and what they were about to do, and how dangerous the next hour might be. She had learned these things out of necessity. In Hawaii, in real estate, those same skills paid. She was good at the work. She built a reputation. And reputation, when you are starting from scratch in a new place with a new life, is everything. Joyce Leroy was part of that life. She has not given interviews about their relationship in the way that people give interviews about their relationships on reality television. She has been present, and she has been private, which is consistent with everything else Cheryl Crane has valued about the life she built. What is known is that they were together for many years. What is known is that they built a business together. What is known is that the partnership was real and lasting in the way that the partnerships in Turner's life never quite managed to be. This is not a criticism of Turner. It is an observation about inheritance. Cheryl Crane looked at what her mother had and could not sustain, and she built something different, something quieter and steadier and less photographed, and she made it last. There is a photograph of Lana Turner from late in her life. She is in a private setting, not a premiere, not a studio portrait. She is sitting in a chair, and she is smaller than the photographs from the 1940s, smaller than anyone who has only seen the MGM portraits would expect. She looks like an ordinary woman of a certain age. She looks like someone's grandmother. She is looking at something off camera, and her expression is unguarded in the way that expressions are unguarded when no one thinks the camera is watching. She looks like she is thinking about something private, something that matters to her. You cannot know what it is. But if you have spent any time with the story of her life and the story of her daughter's life, you might guess. The world always covered Lana Turner as an icon, as a scandal, as a symbol of everything glamorous and dangerous and excessive about old Hollywood. It covered the marriages and the diamonds and the films and the famous face and the famous tragedy of April 4th, 1958. This story covered the person who lived through that night and then had to figure out what to do with the rest of her life. The person who moved to Hawaii and then Palm Springs and built something real and quiet and hers. The person who wrote the truth in a book and then went back to living it. The story of Cheryl Crane is not a tragedy. It is not a cautionary tale. It is something more ordinary and more difficult than either of those things. It is the story of a person who started in an impossible place and found, over time, something that worked, something honest, something livable, and she found it mostly alone, which is the only way anyone ever really finds it. That is the one worth sitting with. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.